Everyone, and welcome to today's super exciting AMA session, where we will be joined by Rennick from the Stratos team, who we will be discussing all about funding with. So I'm going to invite him to join the stage now. And as he's getting ready to join, please say hi in the chat. And as usual, if you have any questions, do feel free to pop them in the questions tab as well. And if we have time, we will go through them. I do have some questions of my own to kind of get you guys started. Hi, how are you?
Hi there.
Hi. Super exciting to have you join. Thank you so much for taking the time. Everyone is very excited in the chat and saying hi. Yeah, I think I'm just going to get straight into it. And I thought a good way to start would just be to ask you a bit about kind of your background, if you want to introduce yourself to everyone who might not know you, how you ended up in Web3, and all that fun stuff.
Sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Rennick. I'm the founding partner of Stratos. So I started Stratos in 2016. Have been investing in crypto since then. Before that, I was working at an investment firm in New York. And when I was there, was studying kind of like the future of finance and how some of the global South would eventually become connected to the more global banking system. And through that, I discovered Ethereum in 2015. I had been familiar with Bitcoin, but I wasn't really like a Bitcoin maxi up to that point. I was interested in it, but I didn't. I wasn't really excited about what was possible in Web3 until I discovered Ethereum and saw, just the breadth of what could be built. And so, yeah, it's obviously been a long road. There's been a lot of cycles since then, but I feel like every cycle we get a new major component built that really drives the space forward. And, obviously, as a firm, we at Stratos have been investing in modular components for some time now. And, our view is that the modular ecosystem and Dymension specifically really unlocks the next major step in not only scaling block space production, but also making it much more accessible to people such as yourselves to actually build the applications you want to see. So really excited to get to know you all and see what you're building. And yeah, I'm super bullish on what's going to happen in Dymension and just the crypto space overall over the next 10 to 20 years.
Yeah, for sure. And to everyone kind of watching, do feel free to share what you're building and stuff in the chat as well. And we can kind of get a bit of a discussion going. I know some people have kind of been playing around with the Dymension tech for a while, and some are kind of new to the ecosystem. So there's a really good range of devs kind of exploring the tech at the moment. So it's super exciting. And for you then, Rennick, personally, were you kind of introduced through it? Are you more interested in the technical aspect, or is it more kind of a financial interest from your end, or do you have a specific niche within Web3 that kind of initially drew you into the space?
Yeah, so initially, what was interesting to me was having been in traditional finance for some time, envisioning the potential and what could be built on a DeFi rail. I was thinking about DeFi before they called it DeFi. This was back in like 2016, so it was looking at the existing financial system and saying, look at all these things that either don't work well or are silly in terms of their design, that are really intended to use humans as middlemen, that could then be disintermediated and create an entirely new financial system. That was the initial thing that got me interested. But then once I started to go down the rabbit hole, as they say, there was the idea of, what's so interesting about crypto is the combination of economic incentives with the software. And the ability to really drive permissionless innovation that would then create all kinds of things outside of finance as well. That would be exciting. And then there was this idea of like self-sovereignty and the fact that then you're eliminating middlemen and you're allowing people to transact globally 24/7, that you can kind of change a lot of the things that I think are limiting the freedoms of people around the world, which I think ultimately is the most important thing.
For sure. And is that still something that you kind of carry with you now when you're looking at projects? Is it still DeFi that kind of sparks your interest the most, would you say?
Yeah, so we definitely, so I was a founding team member of a project called Goldfinch Finance as well, which is a real world asset lending platform. So I personally have experience in DeFi. We do make investments in DeFi. Right now, a lot of our focus is on the infrastructure side. So some of our biggest investments like Dymension obviously are infrastructure pieces, because our view is that we're still in the infrastructure installation phase of crypto, meaning that, if you look at what's happened recently, even in Solana, which is obviously one of the most advanced blockchains and has a, specifically designed virtual machine for on-chain transactions, still is having trouble managing the amount of, transaction volume that there is demand for these days. So, it's going to take some time for us to completely, develop broad-based infrastructure for the crypto space that can manage the amount of demand that we foresee. But within that, we're also interested in, new primitives, new use cases, and then within Dymension specifically, we're typically very focused, but within Dymension, we want to try and be as helpful as possible to all builders who are really driving the ecosystem of Dymension. So we're a little bit less focused and a little bit more opportunistic within Dymension.
I understand. And can you share a bit more about, since obviously the audience now is super interested in all things Dymension related, so it would be great if you could kind of share what was the initial way that you kind of got into contact with the Dymension team, and what did that process look like of you ending up supporting them, and what potential you saw in that particular project?
Yeah, so I think the thing that we're best at doing at Stratos as investors is having a good understanding of where the crypto space is today, and what the major unlocks are that need to happen in the future to get it to the next phase. So for example, we were investing in L2s. We led the Series A of Fuel in early 2021 before people were thinking about L2s as being a major scaling solution. Now, obviously, L2s are where a lot of the activity on Ethereum are, and are clearly the core component of Ethereum scaling. Similarly, we had the view that blockchains would modularize, and solving the data availability constraint would create an entirely new area of development. And in order to replicate the same scale that we had seen in Ethereum and Solana, you'd need to have a settlement hub, if you will. And so we had the view that something like Dymension needed to be built before we actually got introduced to Ishai and the Dymension team. So we met them in it was Q1 of 22, and then we ended up co-leading the seed round in, a few months later. But, right from the start, once we met the Dymension team, saw how clear their vision was, saw that it was very clear that they were going to execute, and, they saw the future similarly in a similar way that we did, that, it really built our conviction and made us want to co-lead the round.
And like for the people in the audience, they're mainly developers interested in whether that is like in a short term in the future, or long term, they're interested in securing funding for their own projects and kind of going that startup route. Do you have some key things that you look at beyond the more general ones, like sharing the same kind of idea of what Web3, where the direction of Web3 is going, et cetera, those kinds of things? Like, do you focus more on team background or specific things that you're looking for in a project that really is like a green flag, so to say, for you?
Yeah, so I would say that the most important thing in venture capital, early stage investing specifically, is betting on the people. So all of the great investments we've made have been betting on exceptional people. And, when I look back and really think about what distinguishes those people from the rest, it's, would have been clear at the time when we first met them. They stood out right from the start. And so, to break that down for you guys, I think that the obviously having a background that is clearly shows that you've done things that are relevant to what you're building today, that's helpful. But it's not everything. It's not necessarily make or break. So, if this is something new that you're doing and maybe you don't have a lot of Web3 experience, or, you're building, let's say, a DeFi dApp and you haven't spent time in finance, that's okay. The more important thing is how clear is your own vision? Why do you need to build what you're building? Why are you the best person in the world to build it? Walk me through the roadmap of, okay, I'm going to raise X dollars, which is going to take me, for the next 18 months or 24 months. And that's going to take me from here to hiring this many devs, which is going to give me this product development roadmap, which is then going to enable me to launch my RollApp in 3 months. And then I'm going to do this marketing campaign that's going to drive liquidity, and my target is 10 million. And, the more clearly you can show an investor that you have a clear vision for what you need to do with your project and how things are going to play out, the more an investor is going to say, okay, this person has already visualized their success in their mind. They know what it's going to take. They know all the steps. They've been thinking about this. It's clear. So it's kind of like if you're going to do anything else in your life, it's easier to go and do it once you've thought through all of the steps and kind of thought through, okay, which is the best approach for this, which is, by the way, things don't always play out as you expect. So like, we've had situations where a founder has come to us and had a very clear vision and it all sounded great. And we decided to make the investment. And then it turned out a few months later or a year later, hey, things have changed, but this is what I'm going to do to now change and adapt. That's okay. You don't have to stick to the plan that you laid out day one because everything changes, but then to come back and be able to say, okay, the situation has changed. I'm going to adapt, but now here are all the steps I'm going to take to adapt from here. It's the same kind of idea, but, I'm trying to make the point that you don't have to know everything perfectly in advance, but you have to have a good plan given what you know at the time.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of the times I think that is half of the work in itself, is just planning it out and, putting into words what it is that you want to do and having that clear goal and plan. So I think that's really good advice, and definitely something that even just for, a hackathon project is really one of those key determinants of how successful a project is going to be beyond just a hackathon, for example, if you have a long-term goal and plan. So that makes complete sense. I can see that there's actually a lot of questions that have come in already. So I'm going to start going through. I think some of them have kind of been answered throughout. But Jamaro asks what projects you're mostly interested in, which I'm assuming is kind of DeFi related, but is there anything specifically maybe for Dymension that you think would be super cool to see?
I think there's a list of roll apps that are going to be launching over the next few months. I think a lot of those are interesting. Just thinking about, in my opinion, an ecosystem, a new network ecosystem needs to be built kind of like piece by piece, meaning that before you can go out and build something that's completely unique, that has never existed in crypto before, you have to build the basic pieces of a well-functioning L1 ecosystem, meaning you need to have the DeFi primitives. So lending, AMM, you need to have perp dexes. You need to have some sort of naming service, like an ENS for Dymension. These are all kind of like the basic things that have worked. A stable coin, I can go down the list, but, I would love to see people building those things. I think those are the first, given where Dymension is as an ecosystem today, it needs to have those things first. There's like the project NIM, which is the AI gaming RollApp. That's really cool. It's very novel, but it's not going to work well without all of these other primitives too. And so, if I were in your shoes, I would kind of look at the things that Dymension needs today that other ecosystems already have and say, okay, which of these things can I build? Am I well positioned to build? Because look, our view is that Dymension is going to be, a multi-generational project. It's going to be around for a long time. It has potential to be really huge. And so building one of the key primitives on Dymension early is like going to be a great long-term play.
For sure. So maybe don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel, but sometimes simple is really, really the answer.
Yeah, look, if you have a great idea for something new and novel that leverages Dymension, like by all means, go for it. But if you're also kind of thinking, okay, well, what do I want to do? What's the right opportunity here? Like go down the list of the basic stuff and build that.
That's really good advice, I think. Okay, and then JV asks, what kind of funding can we get for a gambling, gaming related project? We are planning to build a real product after the hackathon. I don't know if you have some info to share, if there's like a route. I know people are very interested in the funding process. So another question is like, what are the must-have requirements? What timeline? How do people kind of even start that process?
Yeah, so I would say different investors are focused on different things. Some investors are interested in investing in gaming and some aren't. So I think it's just case by case. The general framework for fundraising is, first of all, it depends on what stage you're in. So I'll assume that everyone here is in, early stage, basically a team and an idea, maybe some software that's already been built. That I would say is considered like either the angel round or the pre-seed round, which, the naming changes in venture capital over time. So I wouldn't get too hung up on the naming, but basically, an angel round is something that you raise from basically friends and family. You don't raise it from typically a venture fund, and, it's somewhere in the 250K to 500K total raised range. And that's basically to pay the early team so that you can start developing, the prototype of your product. And then the pre-seed round is the first round where you go out to a fund like ours and raise, $2 to $4 million. And the pre-seed round and the seed round kind of like blend together. So, you don't have to do both. You can do just one. There's no real, you don't have to do any number of fundraising rounds. What really is key about fundraising is to say, these are my project milestones that I want to achieve within a certain time period. Let me raise enough money to get me to achieve those milestones and either then do a token launch or do another fundraising round. So it's really more of a question of what do you need and then raise around what you need rather than kind of fitting the typical venture mold, if you will. But there's a limit on how much you can raise given how mature the project is. So if it's very early and you're basically just an idea, don't focus on raising so much money because A, you don't need it, and B, the investor base who will invest in something that is basically just an idea is much smaller. But then once you can start to show, okay, the product works, it's on testnet, we have a lot of people using it, it's clearly meeting a need that the ecosystem wants, then you can go raise a larger round and then keep building and then raise again. But the other thing I would say is one of the great things about crypto is you don't need to raise nearly as much money to be able to build a project and ship a product that people want. So I would say think from first principles, what do you actually need the money for, and then build your fundraising plan around that.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. And if anyone kind of needs any clarification on anything, as usual, just feel free to kind of pop another question in. And then we had a question from Adrian about how important understanding traditional finance is for developers. I know you kind of touched on this briefly just a second ago, saying that it's not that important, but just wanted to check if maybe you have further thoughts around that.
Yeah, so what I meant was it is not critical that you spend time in traditional finance, like professionally, to be able to succeed in DeFi. I think a lot of the developers who built, amazing tech didn't spend time in traditional finance because they were able to look at things again from first principles and say, how is this supposed to work? Let me kind of redesign it from the ground up using what crypto enables. However, I would highly encourage you to study traditional finance if you're going to build something in DeFi, meaning understand how the basics of traditional finance. How do companies typically raise money? How do they IPO? How do people price stocks? How does a treasury bond get valued? All of these basics that you would see in like a Finance 101 textbook. And, there's tons of information online. There's a million YouTube videos about this kind of stuff. Traditional finance is like very mid-curve. Like you guys are way overqualified intellectually. Like you can understand all the basics of TradFi. It's not that hard. But I think it's important to understand it so that you can avoid some of the pitfalls that are typical, because I think a lot of the mistakes we've seen in crypto, like some of the big blow-ups and things like that, have actually come from just not studying traditional finance and learning from history. Because the thing that's interesting about finance is crypto is completely remaking it in terms of the underlying mechanics and how it will work. But at the end of the day, we're all still human beings. Our brains work the same way that they have for millions of years. So, we're going to repeat the same behavioral mistakes, even though the underlying technology is different. And so if you can think about how to design your protocol in such a way where you avoid those same behavioral mistakes, then you're going to set yourself up for success.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's just a useful knowledge to have in general. I think if you're interested in kind of entrepreneurship and starting your own business, and like speaking of common mistakes or avoiding mistakes, are there any like common pitfalls that you kind of see with projects in terms of trying to secure funding? Is there anything you would recommend avoiding? We've talked a lot about what you should be doing. Is there something that for you is, a common mistake people make?
Yeah, I'll answer that question in two ways. The first one is just when you're raising money really early on as a project, keep things simple. Don't overcomplicate it. Like everything should be simple. You should have one corporate entity in whatever country you want to incorporate in. raise on a safe, have a token warrant connected to it, have a simple cap table, basically take you and your other co-founders, split up the company, and then allow the first phase of investors to buy a piece of that. Don't have a bunch of random people on the cap table. Don't do a lot of fundraising rounds. Just try and keep it simple. And then in terms of in the longer term sense, one of the biggest pitfalls that we see with any kind of crypto project is a highly inflationary token model, where basically you have a large FTV or a large number of tokens that are not issued, and you create a system where you're basically committing to continuously issue lots of tokens over a long time period, which means you could launch your project, the token could do well, and then we get into a bear market, or demand for your project declines for some time period, and you're committed to continue to issue tokens, which will just destroy your token price. And yes, the token price is not the only thing that matters here, but it's also really important to understand that there's a lot of reflexivity between the token price and the success of the project. And what I mean by that is, let's say you want to go raise money and the token price has just rubbed. It gets a lot harder because investors will look at that and say, well, what are the long-term prospects here if the token price is done so poorly? Or if you want to hire new people, a lot of them will look at it and say kind of the same thing. Well, the token price has just gotten crushed. Why do I want to go work here instead of some other, project that maybe the token price has performed better? And also for users, right? Users a lot of times are attracted by, used to be liquidity mining, now it's airdrops. Who knows what the next thing is going to be, but a lot of times projects use their token as currency to attract usage, which is a great thing about crypto, but you have to be really thoughtful about when and how you use that. Obviously, if you look at, a great lesson would be DeFi from last cycle. The DeFi projects did great in late 2020, and then they all got crushed in 2021, even though we were still in a bull market, because they were issuing so many tokens and they just completely flooded the market with their tokens. So I would encourage you guys to think through how you can create token models that are more sustainable and lead to long-term price trajectory going up and to the right and not just getting crushed.
Yeah, that's really, really sound advice for sure. And now kind of moving on into a slightly different topic, more specifically, whether there's any tips or tricks or something that you see happening in order to create more hype around the Dymension ecosystem, or just hype in general around any ecosystem, really. What are tactics that you can use? Why do you think certain projects get really hyped and certain ones don't?
Yeah. So there are a couple of pieces to this. The first thing I'll say is Dymension has done almost one of, if not the best jobs at building hype for the ecosystem and creating a huge community than almost any project I've ever seen. And I'm not just saying that because we're investors. I've been in the space for a while. I've seen lots of projects launch. This was almost the best, by a mile. I can hardly think of others. I mean, I'm sure you guys are all following what happened with Eigenlayer yesterday. They're fumbling the most hyped thing in the space just because they didn't treat their community right. Same thing with, I can go down the list of other projects that have launched recently that have had similar mistakes. So I would say the first thing is you can leverage Dymension. I know the team there is really focused on helping RollApps capture some of that community momentum. So definitely leverage the Dymension team. But beyond that, I would say getting earned media attention. So what does that mean? It's not going out and buying an influencer or a KOL and paying them to talk about your token, because people see that. I mean, you can see through it. However, if you can get people who are opinion leaders to say things about your project legitimately because what you're doing is great and you're building something different, or you're building something that's needed and you're a strong team, or you're going about it in a unique way, that's what I mean by earned media. So the more of that you can build, the more organic the support and community for your project will be. And then I think the last thing is use airdrops. People love free money. It's a simple idea. One of the great things about Dymension is that you guys building RollApps have control over your own execution layer with your own token. It has a lot more value to the market than a traditional dApp. So if you use that well, you can use that to bootstrap a really strong community early. And that will put you really far ahead of almost any other dApp on any other ecosystem.
Yeah, for sure. Airdrops are always going to be a popular thing. Another question from Ayas. Please correct me if I'm pronouncing that badly. I'm sure I am. In the context of tokenizing assets, how does your hackathon address the legal and regulatory challenges that come with representing real-world assets on the blockchain? Are there resources or mentorship available to help participants navigate these complexities? So that's almost the question more for us as well, I guess, as kind of the people in charge of running the hackathon, which we're always happy to help. If there's any specific questions that you have, so do feel free to reach out to me via Discord or email. But for you, Rennick, specifically, do you have any resources or just tips in general to help people navigate that? Because it can get very complex and confusing, especially if you don't have kind of the legal background.
I'm trying to think of a general piece of advice here. So I've been through that myself when I was working with Goldfinch, just thinking about, how do you get loans from the real world on chain? How do you memorialize that? Where do you create the actual legal connection between the asset that exists in the real world and then, the community's funding decision on chain? What happens if the loan defaults? How do you go to court for that? It's very complex. And the answer is basically the legal system is living in the past and has not developed to be able to handle these types of situations. And so it's really case by case. It depends on what kind of asset it is that you want to bring on chain. And then that kind of defines how you need to go about it. And my only answer, really general advice, is to find legal counsel that can help you do that is specifically situated to be able to do it, that has the right background and understands what it is that you're trying to do. But I guess maybe even before going down the road of legal, just build what you think you want to build, make it work, and then worry about the legal later. So you don't have to worry, especially if you're not in the US, you don't have to worry about the SEC or Gary Gensler coming after you. Just build it and then figure out the legal later. If it turns out that you build something and it's massively successful and you have a ton of demand for it, and $1 billion in TVL for a real world asset, you won't be too worried about the fact that you didn't do the legal first. You'll figure that out later, and you'll have a lot of support to go and do that. But don't let the legal side of it up front hold you back. Just build the product, make it work, and then figure out the legal later.
Yeah, for sure. Hopefully there will be people there who'll be able to help you at that point. Okay, I think that's the final the final question I can see in the chat, at least. So if anyone has any more, please ask them now before we wrap things up. I think there just I have one more question for you personally. Just is there a way that you would measure the success of your investment in blockchain projects? And like for Dymension specifically, what are you hoping to see, and what is your vision? How would you, measure the success of it and track it? Is there anything specifically?
Well, I want to see Dymension become a top 10 project. And
that's a good goal to have.
We think
for
it's
sure.
possible. We think it's possible. I mean, I think that Dymension is well on its way. So that would be great. But really beyond, superficial metrics, it's seeing Dymension on the leaderboard of TVL transactions. But, more, that's going to take time. What I'd really love to see is some RollApps launch that have, high FTV. I'd love to see 500 million plus FTV on RollApps, because I think what that means in the short term is developers like you guys are going to look at that and say, why wouldn't I build a RollApp and launch at 500 million FTV versus building a dApp on, an L2 and it being worth a tenth of that? And so the economic incentive is, I think, going to be really strong for Dymension. So I'd love to see that.
For sure. I have one final thing I just wanted to share with everyone joining today. We haven't officially announced it yet, but we are going to be running a follow-up program to this hackathon in collaboration with the Dymension team, a sort of accelerator, incubator for some of the best projects that we see during this hackathon and beyond. So I'm going to share a form that's basically just expressing your interest. So if you do fill out that form, it's very simple. It's just basically name and email. We will then contact you when the applications are open, and you'll be kind of the first ones to know. So just wanted to put that out there as well as an extra kind of carrot for you to work extra hard on your RollApps the final few weeks. And there's definitely a lot of opportunity for those projects that do well in this space. Okay, I think that's it from my end. Do you have any final kind of words of encouragement, Rennick, that you want to share with everyone today before we sign off?
I would just say, good luck. Build things that you think people are going to want. Don't be too worried about achieving perfection. Just ship the product first and get it working out in the world, and then see how people react to it and then make changes from there. Don't wait for it to be perfect before you ship.
That's really good advice. I love it. And if you guys have any other questions, as usual, feel free to reach out. Thank you all for joining today. Also, thank you so much, Rennick, for taking the time. Really insightful answers and really helpful advice, I think, for everyone watching. And loads more will be watching as well, the recording that will be up tomorrow. So loads of people saying thank you now in the chat.
Thanks, everyone.
So, yeah. Thank you so much. Bye.
All right, bye. Thanks a lot, everyone. Good luck.